Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Debbie Gould, and I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Nashville. And on behalf of the League and the College of Education of Lipscomb University, I want to welcome you here today. The League of Women Voters is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization with the goal of creating an informed and engaged citizenry and advocating for responsive and responsible government. So today's public conversation about charter schools is very much in line with what we do. And we're really grateful to Lipscomb University for partnering with us and for their hospitality in providing us with this wonderful venue. I'd also like to recognize a number of elected officials who are joining us here today. Metro School Board Chair Cheryl Mays is here, and two of our state legislators, Deborah Moody and Mark White, are joining us. And I think, is there anyone else that I've missed? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Although the League does not support individual candidates or parties, we do develop advocacy positions after careful study. Today we'll have an opportunity to add to our knowledge from our distinguished panel. A list of additional resources are also available on the registration table outside if you'd like some more information, and we'll also have additional things on our website for the League. You know, 10 years ago, a discussion about local charter schools was really a hypothetical one. But today, the reality is that in Davidson County alone, there are 22 operating charter schools. So our conversation today is really going to address some of the pragmatic issues that come when charter schools exist in public school systems. Questions about their authorization process, accountability, fiscal, legal, and educational, and their impact. And our moderator today is especially well qualified to lead this discussion. Dr. Candace McQueen has served as Dean of the College of Education of Lipscomb for the past 5 years and has overseen its growth in both size and stature. The college's programs have been consistently highlighted as one of the top teacher education programs in the state for quality and effectiveness. And as director of the Ayers Institute for Teacher Learning and Innovation, Dr. McQueen has partnered with the Tennessee Higher Education Commission to create pre-service teaching resources on Common Core standards for Tennessee's higher education institutions and alternative teacher prep programs. She is especially familiar with local charter schools through her role on the review committee for local charter school applications. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. McQueen. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. It's fabulous to see you here, and we've been anticipating this event, so it's great to have you here. And I want to say it was an honor to assist the League of Women Voters. It's such a professional group, and Debbie is a fabulous person to work with, and she's very insightful in the topic as well, and so we appreciate the attendance and really this openness from the League of Women Voters to invite others into the program. This topic is a specific conversation that serves to address some questions that have been stemming from last year's statewide charter authorizer bill that did pass in the House last year and was not ultimately voted on in the Senate. Last year's bill would allow the appointment of a panel that could overrule local school board decisions on charter applications in any system with at least one failing school in the state's bottom 5% of low-performing schools. While this discussion was ultimately the catalyst for this event, our intent is to provide information around authorization and how does it differ from approval in a context around charter schools. So you're going to hear some individuals specifically to help us set this context and to provide information. Then we will ask some specific questions of the panel, adding two other individuals to that panel, and these questions were developed with the League of Women Voters. First of all, the questions were designed to focus on charter school authorization and approval, as well as the contextual piece, what is their impact on systems, communities, families, and ultimately students. We believe information is power. And we hope that when you leave today, you will have more information on this topic that sometimes, or all the time, is politically charged, and leave with additional information you can take back as you help inform other constituents. I did want to say that we will not be going over bios extensively. They are in your seat, and so I hope you will read those so you know who you're hearing from. And we will be hearing specifically from 3 individuals first, so I'll have them come up and have a seat. These 3 individuals will give us 3 contexts and speak specifically to us with PowerPoint slides before we start the question period. They each have 5 to 8 minutes for that discussion. First is Alex Medler, who is going to give us some national perspective on this topic, and he has consulted with Tennessee, and so it will be helpful for him to give that perspective as well. Our second individual is our friend, Alan Coverstone, right here in Nashville, and Alan will give us some local perspective around charter approval versus authorization here and talk through the local approval process. And then finally, we're honored to have Chris Barbick with us, the superintendent of the state's Achievement School District, and he will provide us with some statewide context around this topic as well. We are going to stay on time, and so with that, I'm going to turn it directly over to Alex to let him begin the conversation from a national perspective.
Thank you very much. So it's a pleasure to be with you here tonight. I'm going to very quickly go through the basics of authorizing from a national perspective, just sort of set a context. And so I'm assuming that's, there we go. I'm coming from the National Association of Charter School Authorizers. We are about a 15-year-old organization, and we work with all the groups that authorize charter schools around the country. But we don't so much defend the authorizers as much as we are sort of an institution dedicated to making the charter schools succeed by focusing on those authorizers as a key leverage point. And we work on policy. We work directly with authorizers like the Achievement School District and Nashville, and we also work on policy. And my role is to try to influence policy at the state and federal level to try to make sure charter school sectors are as successful as possible. So just back of the envelope, there's about 6,000 charter schools in the country, and there's about 1,000 authorizers. Those are school districts, state departments of education, specialty items like the ASD here in Tennessee. Most of those 1,000 actually are school districts with just 1 or 2 schools. So there's about 700 of the 1,000 that really have very small authorizing portfolios. They mostly run traditional schools, and then they have 1 or 2 charters. There's about 100 entities that have 10 or more charter schools in their portfolio, and they tend to create the more systemic, sophisticated professional approaches, and they're who we focus on a lot of the time. So I'll give you a little more info about how authorizing works. Sometimes I really resent the word authorizing because it's sort of a verb instead of a noun, and people think authorizing, they think approval, and they think, oh, the authorizer's job is to decide who gets a charter. And that is just one very small part of the whole piece. So that's one of the messages I want you to take away is there's a whole lot of other work. The key charter bargain is that the charter schools get autonomy, that they have actually heightened accountability that's greater than traditional public schools, and in exchange, they will produce schools that people want to attend and that have higher student performance. We at NACSA try to figure out how to make that bargain work in more places so that we're pro-charter. We want there to be more of them, and we want them to succeed, and we're trying to create a place where more of them can succeed through better authorizing. So at the core of authorizing, I like to point out there are 3 key pieces of work which we call our core principles. And often people get stuck with just 1 or 2 of these things in their mind when in fact the authorizers have to balance them. And then sometimes they are balanced with each other. Sorry, is that better? So number 1 is to maintain high standards for the schools. So it is up to the authorizers to say this is not good enough. You cannot have a charter, and it's up to the authorizers primarily to say you're not fulfilling your obligations and so you have to close. So one of the first jobs is high standards. Number 2, and this is kind of tricky for people, is that they have to uphold the school's autonomy. Especially for school districts, sometimes as authorizers, they want to say, well, you can have your charter, but we need to make sure you do this and this the way we do it and take care of staffing the way we'd like you to. But in fact, it's the authorizers who actually play a buffering function, and our other 2 speakers can speak to those roles to make sure the schools have all the autonomy they need to innovate. And then third and finally, they have to protect student and the public interests. So it's not that the rest of our mechanisms are in place, our state departments, our departments of justice, our feds. There's all sorts of things that go on in America that protect tax dollars and that protect students' rights. But the authorizers really have a primary responsibility to be the ones. I like to say that if a charter school ever makes the headlines, it's generally because something bad has happened. And if you're really outraged by the story, you say, somebody ought to do something. And 9 out of 10 times that somebody that should have done something is an authorizer. And they should have seen that it could have happened, they should have avoided it, or they should do something to fix it. The other part about understanding authorizing is to know that and our standards get to this, is that it affects the entire life cycle of a charter school. So they have to build an agency with enough commitment and capacity to do their job, but then they have to manage an application process and make decisions about who gets charters. They then have to go through a performance contracting process, so they have the tools in place to oversee the school. Then they have ongoing oversight and evaluation of the school throughout its entire life, coming up to a point where they'll do revocation and renewal decisions. So far from being authorizers who just approve schools, they are the people who create a system that is different than our regular system that enables them to select and oversee and manage schools. We describe it often as managing a portfolio of schools, and that can include everything from creating an attractive environment so that you can recruit actors, to creating tools that allow you to manage their performance while actually balancing those 3 core principles I just talked about. So throughout this whole life cycle, you have to deal with managing to high standards, protecting students and taxpayers, and protecting their innovation. And that's the details of what authorizing is all about. And I like to describe it as sort of a cycle, so that when one school is involved, they sort of think about everything they do to get approved, and then once they're approved, it's everything they do to open their doors. And then once the doors are open, they've got real kids, and they need to do everything every day to serve all those kids. And every moment you're in the charter school sector, or you're in a charter school, you're proposing one, is a highly urgent, time-sensitive piece. But from the authorizer's perspective, it's a cycle that's going around and around with multiple schools on multiple clocks that have to be managed. So in any year, an authorizer is putting out an RFP for new proposals. They're evaluating the proposals that come in. They're contracting with the schools that were just approved. They are doing ongoing oversight, making sure compliance is happening. Some of their schools are coming up for renewal, and they're engaged in those processes. So the authorizing task is actually a highly specialized, highly technical enterprise. And I'd actually say one of the things I find most interesting, it's some of the coolest performance management going on in the public sector in America right now. The tools people are creating, the ways they're managing to involve communities, to measure progress, to actually have high stakes decision making that matters. It's going on in this cycle in the charter school space. I don't have more slides for this, but I do want to just bring a couple things to your attention. In the world of authorizing, often the conflict is sort of like, well, who should do it? And people will say, oh, well, the school district should do it, or the state should do it, or we should let universities do it. And that's part of the discussion here in Tennessee. And we at NACSA weigh in on that. But I'll give you a couple of observations from data. One is most districts that authorize don't authorize very many schools. So they'll deal with 1 or 2 schools when it comes up in their community, and they will deal with it like they deal with everything else, which is to get by. A few districts in any state, especially your larger urban districts, are likely to have larger numbers come forward, and they're more likely to create institutions to deal with it. Some of these are going to be highly favorable of charters and very supportive. Some of our best authorizers in the country are school districts. I used to hold out Denver Public Schools as one of the best model district authorizers. Now I hold them out as just one of the best authorizers. And Alan and his team here in Nashville have put in place a large number of our recommended practices and created the infrastructure of a strong authorizer. You see many districts that do that. Meanwhile, the criticism that comes when people are tired of district authorizers tends to be just assuming that they're hostile to everything. It just sort of paints it black and white, when in fact they may be trying to exercise a technical system. They may have their own schools they'd like and those they don't. And what we try to do at NACSA is to put in place, as technically oriented, a merit-based process that depoliticizes it. Because one of the things school districts are really good at, the reason we've created them as an institution in America, is to manage local politics. And so the same things that make them respond to 30 people with signs screaming at them make them a good public institution, but not so good maybe sometimes at the modern job of performance management. And so an interesting aspect is how you can depoliticize the act of authorizing and sort of focus on its technical merits while still gathering and accommodating and dealing with community input, but not having everything be a political fight with winners and losers. So that's one of the challenges. The last thing I would say is when you create other entities, the problem we have sometimes around the country is something you do not yet have here, and I don't think you'll be getting it in Tennessee, is having people who want too many schools. And so they will approve anybody who comes forward. And I just want to say hats off to Tennessee that the problem you're not dealing with here is cleaning up from some authorizer who thought that anybody should have a charter, should get one, and then if they've got one and they haven't been arrested yet, they should stay open. You are far away from that spectrum, and so you're in a situation here where you can deal with how to create rigorous processes that are charter friendly, that succeed at a larger scale.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Looking around the room, I love seeing all of my friends, and I'm reminded that Alex is from out of town, and I appreciate his coming here. But I get to be from in town, and I'm proud to be from in town. I think what we're doing here in Nashville, especially as it relates to school reform and as it relates to school improvement across the board, is something we all ought to be very proud of. And so I come to you this afternoon from that perspective. And if I say anything that offends any of you or that you disagree with, I strongly encourage you to look me up and let's have that conversation, because that conversation and that information is what's going to continue to lead us forward toward progress in this city for our kids. I would say that I'm only involved in charter schools and I'm only involved in schools because I am really deeply committed to the notion that every single kid is entitled to a high quality education and that they can't all get them in exactly the same way and in exactly the same place. And my entire commitment to work in the charter school space here in Nashville has been because I am committed to the idea that the work we have done and will continue to do with charter schools is expanding the capacity for our city and our county to serve students at a higher level. It is not a zero-sum game as we sometimes fall into, and I hope we can clarify some of that this afternoon. In fact, some of the work is mischaracterized, I would say, as reform 100 students at a time. But our commitment from the beginning has really been to leverage charter schools, the leaders, and the innovations and resources that charter schools bring to expand our district's capacity, to expand student achievement, manage our growing student populations wisely and keep those populations growing, to expand choices to fit the wide and diverse range of needs that our students have, but also desires that our families have and locations where they occupy and do their work across the city and where they live, and ultimately to maximize our returns on the investment that we make collectively in public education, because we do make a collective investment and we all benefit from and want to see that investment maximized and producing the greatest gains for the greatest number of students. In terms of our local process, we really begin by articulating the priorities against which we'll evaluate the competitive merits of our potential applications. And these priorities are aimed at advancing our goals by analyzing in particular current levels of academic performance or underperformance in schools across the district, the implications of choice-based enrollment systems on our commitment to diversity, the degree to which new schools help to meet the demands of rapid student growth in our county, the ability of a new school to serve students in an underperforming district school by converting the management of that school, and the opportunity to extend pathways to high school for students that are currently attending school in some of our high-performing charter middle schools by helping those middle school operators to grow into high schools that the students and families can count on attending as a result of having been in the program that they've been in. For each of these priorities in the process, we've defined and articulated those things that we look for as indicators of applicants who are not only capable in terms of their ability to run an organization, attract leaders, and actually lead schools, but are also capable of advancing the goals that we have and the criteria that we use to evaluate which of our investments on an annual basis will produce the greatest return in this sector and offer the greatest leverage and capacity expansion in our ability to deliver high-quality education for every student in the district. And so we have spelled out pretty clearly those things that we're looking for in terms of academic performance, diversity management, growth and management of growing student populations and serving the needs that we have because we're really fortunate to be such a growing community and a thriving community here in Nashville, articulating the experiences that we've had with conversion of management of schools, but also identifying and isolating those opportunities that schools and school management organizations can help us to fill in the future, and expanding and helping to replicate and grow those current operators who are doing a great job and with whom we're getting a great return on our investment. In the process, We go through, and I think that slide is missing. Was it there? No, it's not there. We go through essentially a 4-part process in reviewing applications. It will begin February 1st with letters of intent delivered to our office to let us know who intends to submit an application this year. April 1st, we will receive applications, and our office will begin through the use of application review teams to scrutinize the capacity of those organizations to operate. Clearly, those without the capacity to operate will be recommended for denial at that point. Beyond that, we will then start to scrutinize the capabilities of the applicants we receive to advance the goals that we've articulated, and that process will continue through the summer. I do want to highlight Carol Swan, who is in the audience today. It is her leadership and work that brings teams together to evaluate our applications. We rely heavily on volunteers from different sectors of our community, and this is as good an opportunity as any for me to make a pitch that if you would like to contribute to your community in an important way, we're always looking for people who have expertise in finance, in governance, in education, and otherwise to help us to evaluate and put a good technical look at the applications that we receive.
Good afternoon. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for having this conversation. I think, when I moved here 2 years ago, I've just been incredibly surprised at the tone of the conversation around charters. I think it's been, for the most part, a pretty unproductive conversation. I think it's been a gigantic distraction from a lot of the good work that's happening here in Nashville. And I think having opportunities like this to gather people, to have a conversation, I want to thank you all for just being here and learning more about what all this means. Because I think if you follow the story in the press, I don't think it's a fair story. So I appreciate you all taking time on a Monday afternoon to come and learn more. And I appreciate Candace for providing a forum and a place to have this conversation. I'm excited to be up here. I'm going to be fairly brief. I just want to do a couple things. One, a lot of you probably don't even know what the Achievement School District is, so I want to take like 3 or 4 minutes and just explain what we are and talk about why chartering is an important part of our strategy to try and move schools out of the bottom 5%. Before I do that, I think let's just take away the term charter, because I think that term's so loaded right now. I think Alex nailed it in his presentation. This is about autonomy, right? This is about investing in educators and giving people closest to the kids the ability to make decisions that matter most. It's not about top-down mandates. It's not about everybody's on page 55 on Wednesday, which is how some school districts around the country operate. But instead, it's saying we're going to trust our educators to make those decisions, and more importantly, we're going to give parents choice, right? When we walk out of this room, we're going to get to be able to decide where we buy gas for our car. We're going to get to decide what toilet paper we buy, what chewing gum we chew. And yet, it's 2014, and we still assign kids to a school based on their zip code in the United States. The most important choice that a family has, where they send their kid to school, we still assign kids based on zip code. So the fact that in 2014 we're still doing that, I think, is we have a lot to learn. We have a long ways to go, and I think working together and not on polar opposites is how we start to solve this problem. So that's what I want to talk a little bit about. So if I can figure out how to operate this. So just real quick, the Achievement School District was created as part of the Race to the Top application that Tennessee won back in 2010. Our charge is to take the 85 schools that make up the bottom 5% of all the schools in the state and try and move them to the top 25% in 5 years. If you look at this map, you can see that the vast majority of our schools that are in the bottom 5% aren't here in Nashville. The vast majority of the schools in the bottom 5% are in Memphis. And if you look at the current 16 schools that make up the ASD today, 15 of those schools are in Memphis. We have one school here in Nashville where we've partnered with Lead Public Schools as part of a conversion of Brick Church Middle School up on the north side off Trinity, and they're in their second year of that conversion. They have both 5th and 6th graders, and it's been a great partnership. We've worked quite well with Lead, and we've worked quite well with MNPS to get that school off the ground. But the vast majority of our work's been in Memphis, and I think this map explains why. Just to put a quick number to it, when we talk about bottom 5%, we're talking about this. We're talking about 1 out of 10 kids being able to read and write. So this isn't just some abstract. I mean, we're talking about schools that are at the bottom of the barrel. And before the last NAEP results, where Tennessee was in the mid-40s, now we've come up quite a bit. You could arguably say that these were some of the worst schools in the country. And so we have a pretty tall order in front of us, and because we don't feel like we have a monopoly on great ideas, chartering, finding great educators, finding entrepreneurial educators who have innovative ideas and innovative practices, we felt like was a strategy for how we start to move these schools, make them better, so that we can do something about these numbers. So our approach is to create what we call a portfolio school district. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second, where we focus on feeder patterns. And what I mean by that is our philosophy is the way you fix a high school is you make sure the ninth graders that are coming into it aren't reading 5 grade levels behind. And you make sure that the middle school that feeds into that high school works. And the way that you fix middle schools is you make sure that 6th graders or 5th graders in the case here in Nashville aren't coming in 5th grade reading on a 1st or 2nd grade level. And so that we don't attack this one school at a time, but that we look at feeder patterns, because when you look at where the schools are, it wouldn't surprise you, but they're clustered in some of the poorest communities in the state. And so this isn't just a